Hello, YNABers. My name is Jesse Meekum, and this is a special YNAB podcast where I am featuring one of my good friends, Ramit Sethi. He is releasing a newly updated version of his book that is now, unbelievably, 10 years old. And I remember when the book first came out, I gave it a read, promoted it then, and wanted to promote it again. Ramit shoots straight. He's extremely smart, and I think you will really enjoy this interview. If you don't know about Ramit Sethi at all, I'll give you just a little bit of his bio. He writes about money, obviously, business, and psychology. And just to add to that, the psychology insights I always find particularly useful. He does this for 1 million readers every month at iwillteachyoutoberich.com. He's been featured in the New York Times, Fortune, my favorite magazine, the Tim Ferriss podcast, and the Wall Street Journal. And now he is being featured on the YNAB podcast. He studied technology and psychology at Stanford and lives in New York with his wife. And I am jealous of the fact that he lives on New York. You guys can follow Ramit on Instagram and Twitter. It's always good for a laugh because he's pretty snarky sometimes and it's funny. And that is at Ramit, R-A-M-I-T. So in this interview, we dive into what you may find at first to be a little counterintuitive, but we talk about spending, actually. And spending strategically, maybe even lavishly. We actually come to spontaneously this idea of a category group called the over-the-top spending. And anyway, I thoroughly enjoyed the interview with Ramit. I always enjoy it when I get a chance to chat with him. He's super smart. So I hope you will give this interview a listen. Take from it anything you find useful. Disregard anything you don't like, of course. And keep doing what you're doing. All right, Ramit, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a long time since we did dinner, in New York, I don't know, 5, 8 years ago. I have no concept of how long ago that was, but
it's too long. But I remember the tea shop that we went to. We had a great time.
That's right. Yeah, when we were there over a year ago, I kept thinking I would see that place, but I had no idea where we were at any time anyway. So, and I know it was a little bit hidden, you had to know where you were going. So
you only know it if you know it.
Exactly. But, so I am full of envy because you live where I briefly lived for 3 months and my whole family, every kid, Julie, we all miss it terribly.
Oh man. Well, listen, I would love to welcome you back anytime you want to come. We'll do a family friendly, New York trip. It'd be awesome.
It doesn't even have to be family friendly. We did the craziest stuff with all of our kids. People were like, "Are you running a school? What's going on?" So it was, mostly on the subway, people are very quiet and to themselves, which is totally okay. But we would, without fail, someone would just keep looking, and then halfway through the trip, be like, "Okay, I got to ask, are these all your kids?" So we had good conversations with normally very quiet people on the subway.
Wow,
well, except for the loud, obnoxious ones. There's always the loud guy, but
Yeah. I mean, just to put some perspective on it, in the neighborhood that I live in, there's hardly any kids at all. If you see 4 kids walking around, you're like, what are these kids doing here? And then you go to a different neighborhood and there's just kids everywhere.
Exactly.
So if I saw that many kids on a train, I'd be like, huh?
Yeah, what's going on? We were in the Upper West Side, which is more kid-friendly, but what they mean by kid-friendly is one baby in a stroller, you're good to go, So it's, anyway, super. I just love that place so much. All right, but let's cut to the chase here. So you wrote "I Will Teach You to Be Rich" 10 years ago, and now you were due for an update. So I guess let's see. I want to go personal with you, but before we do that, tell me just kind of high level, what were the big additions? Because I know a lot of YNABers have definitely read your book already, but give us kind of the high level of what the changes were, what you felt like, over the last 10 years, I need to add these things in.
Well, first off, the publisher wanted me they've been wanting me to update the books, pretty much since it came out.
Yeah. And
I always wrote a book as if I wanted it to be completely timeless. Mm-hmm. And I believe that good money advice doesn't really change. The core fundamentals of long-term low-cost investing, of tracking what you spend and of being conscious about it, that stuff doesn't change.
Yeah.
So I wrote the book in that way. I mean, it took me 9 months just to get the table of contents right back in 2007 when I was writing it.
Right.
And the book came out and, it came out at the bottom of the recession. In fact, March 2009 was literally the bottom of the recession. And I remember my publisher and all these local news directors were like, do you need to change anything because of this recession? And I was like, no, follow the advice in the book. And, and so, the book comes out, and back then, if we all flash back to 2009, people didn't really want to talk about investing.
No.
In fact, these local news directors in all these cities were like, what are you talking about? We have 10% unemployment. And I said, yes, we should talk about saving and address that. But we also have 90% employment.
Right.
We have people who want to grow. So I was really proud that when I went back through this book, 95% of the investing advice is exactly the same.
Yeah, perfect.
So that's great. That made me feel good. But there are some things that changed. I added 80 new pages of material. Mm-hmm. So 80 pages include, there's new tools. There's lots of stuff that wasn't out before. There's robo-advisors.
Oh, yeah. They're big now. They're
big.
Yeah, huge.
That's one of the most popular questions is like, Ramit, do you still agree about Vanguard, or what should I do? Should I consider Wealthfront or Betterment? So there's that. There's new tools and philosophies like FIRE. Yeah. That's a big one that's really come out, and there's a lot of nuance to that. And then, of course, there's things like crypto, and these lunatics who I had to pull them out. So there's that. So that's new tools. Then there's like things have changed in my life, right? My business has grown substantially. I've also gotten married. That's been a huge thing. And then the final part that I added as part of these 80 pages, this was really my favorite, was the stories of people who use the book to create their rich life.
Yeah.
And what I love about these stories is they're different ages. They're young, old, black, white, men, women, all over the spectrum. And all of them created their own rich life, right? Some of them have lots of kids. Some of them have no kids. Some of them travel. Some of them just save like 50% of their income.
Right.
And I wanted to highlight all of them to show that you can use I Will Teach You to Be Rich to create your rich life.
Yeah. So when someone reads your book, they aren't going to be told. I know you kind of go against whatever grain is left of the what's David Bach. He introduced us to the latte thing, and I know early on you're like, give me a break. I'm of the same mindset, and I've always loved how you've said, cut costs mercilessly, but then indulge. You say it better. How do you say that? What's that phrase? I love it. Say it. I know you know it.
Like, spend extravagantly on the things you love, as long as you cut costs mercilessly on the things you don't.
Yes, I love that. That is truer words cannot be spoken. So in that sense, you're still leaving. I mean, that's the framework within which anyone can then make their decisions, right? So,
yes. And totally. I think that when you see examples of other people truly spending extravagantly, suddenly it opens up a whole different world of money. Yeah. And I think one thing that I was really pleased to be able to write in this book was, if you think about most money advice, if you think about the emotional tenor of it, it's almost always negative.
Yeah.
You will think of words like anxiety, guilt, overwhelmed, I should, all that stuff. And then I just want to flip that and say, hey, tell me something you absolutely love spending money on. Mm-hmm. I call it a money dial. We all have something. For me, it's convenience. I've oriented my whole life around convenience. I spend a tremendous amount of time and money on it. Most people think that's like crazy. Other people will do it on relationships, or they travel, or wellness. There's a variety of money dials. And when I ask them, what would it feel like to be able to double or triple or quadruple your spending? And suddenly they get the power to dream. It becomes amazing. So when we talk about spending extravagantly, a lot of people have never actually thought about what extravagant spending on the thing they love is.
Right.
For example, for me, if it's convenience, maybe you might have somebody come and clean your house or change your oil, right? Maybe instead of once a month, it's once a week.
Right.
Maybe you have a full-time assistant, and again, that's not relevant to some people. Traveling, maybe you travel a month a year. So in order to spend extravagantly, you need to cut costs mercilessly. And that's where I think your spending really should be more of a barbell. It should be heavy on the things you love. In fact, heavier than you've ever imagined. And then you should also cut back on the things you don't.
Interesting. A lot of times people will imagine I'm guilty of this for sure. They'll imagine the amount of money they want to acquire, right? They'll imagine that big pile at the end of the road, wherever that is, however much it is. But the idea of imagining spending the pile is really, I like that. I like that a lot.
Well, Everyone teaches you how to save, but nobody teaches you how to spend.
Yeah.
And that is a critical thing. That's a muscle. And you see this all the time, particularly in the lean fire community with people who have fairly large net worths. We're talking 400, 500, 800K, but they will constantly write about feeling guilty, for getting an extra large Coke when they're eating out. Right. That doesn't make any sense. That's not a healthy mindset on money. If you have $800,000 net worth or whatever the number is, if you've consciously decided you don't want to drink soda or you don't care about popcorn, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's very rarely the case that I read on things like the Lean Fire Forum. It's more words like guilty, anxious, etc. And I want to sort of challenge people to take the emotions from hot to cool. Hot is words like anxious, overwhelmed, guilty. Cool is, you know what? I decided to do this. I was happy to do it. Or that's not important to me and I'm not going to spend money.
Yeah, interesting. I had a good breakthrough years ago, like 10 years after. Julie and I, we'd been married definitely 10 plus years, and obviously we're budgeters, right? But if people look into budgeting really closely, they realize it's just a way to be conscious about your spending, as you always talk about. But my spending, Julie runs the grocery budget for sure, 100% of the time. She one time texted me and she's like, "Hey, I'm at Costco. What do I need?" And I'm like, "What do they have? Just look around, let them tell you." But she's much better about it. So I was always going back to her and saying, "Hey, we could cut groceries. Just always looking at the number." Right. And one day, I think she just had a flash of brilliance, or felt that she could share maybe more than she had before. But she was like, "Jesse, when I go to the grocery store, I measure success by how quickly I'm in and out and how quiet the kids are. That's it."
Whoa,
and
amazing.
I'm like, "Oh." And then it was like, "Well, how much do you need to achieve that goal?" And she's like, "Honestly, $200 more a month, I could, it'd be great." And I'm like, "Here you go." And it wasn't that, we're always batting back and forth. Like, what do we want to do here? Just last night we were setting up May's budget and I'm like, how much, we're still working on furniture for the new house. I'm like, "How much do you think we need here?" So we're always debating and asking and informing. So I'm never dictating a budget to her, but I was regularly pressing on that number until she told me what the real value was for her. And then it was so easy for me to be like, "Oh, I completely understand." And we've never talked about it since,
Yeah, I love that. To me, that's a very advanced concept of money, which is, instead of approaching it from a scarcity perspective, is using money as a tool. And you see this with the wealthy, right? And in fact, we have something coming out where we're going to talk about the psychology of the wealthy. And one of the core elements is using money as a tool. So for example, if a tool could be, in your case, paying an extra $200 a week or a month for groceries to solve the real problem, done. Yeah. Easy, done. Let's never even talk about it again. Here you go. For others, it might be about using it as a tool for an experience. Maybe you take kids to Disneyland and you splurge for the extra fast pass or even the private guide. There's so many different ways of splurging. And sometimes it could be, I want fresh flowers every single week. And that is just about experience. So there's lots of ways to treat money like a tool. I think that once you get past the anxiety and the hot emotions, suddenly you can start to say, what is important to me? And if you're in a relationship, to us, and then how can we use money to get a better result, with whether it's faster, more extravagant, all different kinds of results. Yeah. You can use money for that. That's when I think the world really opens up and it's a rich life. That's what the whole book is about. Yeah,
I love that. And I love that it's individual. And we've really tried, when I was first kicking off YNAB, literally almost 15 years ago. And I think you and I were both writing at the time, just in these little rinky-dink blogs, most likely. And I remember being very hand slappy in my writing, really opinionated
what do you mean?
About what people should spend their money on. And I can't believe you do this and that. And as I've grown up a little, we as a company, we've been very conscientious about not telling people where to spend their money, just to make sure they're aware of it. And so I don't know if you've ever been stuck in this situation, but I try and give an example of we don't even care if you do blah, which is all, I'm still saying it's a judgment. You know, like you get caught. You're like, I don't even care if you buy your dog, you know, diamond studded leather collars. And people are like, oh, well, he kind of does because he said he didn't even care about it. So it's super funny when people are like, well, what do you mean? It's hard for me to even give an example of not giving an example because
I agree. You know what? But both of us, but it's funny you say that. I would have never thought of your writing as being judgmental. I would never have thought of that. And definitely from us knowing each other for a long time, I would have never thought that way. But I share the sentiment because I regret being judgmental about like many things. One is when I was in my early 20s, I was very judgmental about how people spent their money, which really I just didn't understand.
Yeah.
And some of those examples were like, I would be flying on a plane and I would be like, ha, so dumb, spending money on business class. We're all getting to the same place. Ha ha ha, they're so dumb. And it's like, actually, if anyone was dumb in that plane, it was me. Because if you have enough money to afford flying business class, you're probably not stupid. And so maybe, just maybe what I should have said instead of disparaging was to become curious and to say like, why would someone pay 4, 5, 6 times the amount to fly on a business class flight? And what I didn't understand is there are so many reasons. One, they might just have so much money that to them, it's the same price equivalent as me flying economy.
Absolutely.
At 22, right? That's something that a lot of people just don't get. Or 2, they might have a business meeting. 3, they might have arthritis. You know, there's so many different things. And then the world rudely awakened me to that when, you know, I offered to pay for my mom to fly to India. And my mom, she wants to have room to stretch out her legs on this very long flight. I didn't think twice about splurging for a business class international flight for her. Of course, she's my mom. So the world has really taught me there's a lot of nuance to spending. And I think like you, time has made me less judgmental about, number one, what is your rich life? You don't have to want to live in Manhattan. It's totally fine. Some people, I have this reader in my book who retired at 35 with his wife and they drive an RV around the country. Like that is not my rich life, but
definitely not mine.
But it's theirs. And I respect that.
Yeah.
And then you can also get there in different ways too.
Yeah. I like that. The curiosity is, if we all, I mean, this is not a political podcast or anything even remotely of the sort, but imagine if we all in every facet of life could just be more curious, you know? Like imagine if I had been more curious about Julie's resistance to my, you know, like in month 3 of her resistance to the grocery budget being so little, if I would have just like, I'm curious, like, why? Tell me more, you know? Like just grope around for a little bit, trying to find out information. If you would have picked the ear of one of those people on a first class flight, you would have definitely learned more than you did, you know, sitting there smirking, right?
For 10 years, 100%. Yeah. So what do you think is something we could be curious about like today? For everyone listening, there's definitely something you have seen someone spending a lot of money on. Let's pick some common examples. I'll go first, then you give me one. One is people buying like a $500 plus sweater.
Yeah.
What's your example?
Suits. Like you can get a nice suit for, in my mind, I'm thinking you can get a nice suit for $800. Okay. But there's a suit at this place I got my suit at and it's $6,000.
Okay. Now we're talking. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Big differential.
Love it. Okay. Yeah. So beautiful. So there's so many examples, right? It could be eating at a very high-end restaurant or flying business class or spending money on a certain apartment or house, whatever the case may, or a bike. Who knows? Yeah. I would challenge everyone listening. Take one thing that when you heard someone spent money on it, your first reaction was, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Yeah. And flip that from disparagement to curiosity, from D to C, and say, why might they have done that? And come up with at least 10 reasons. Most people will have no problem coming up with 3. But to come up with 10 is really hard because, frankly, most people's money lens or the way that they view the world through a set of eyeglasses that are all about frugality, that spending less is always better. But if you force yourself to take off those lenses for just a minute and put on a different set of lenses, the lenses might be results. That's why you might pay for a personal trainer when in reality you could just go on YouTube and get the same workouts. It might be about experience, which is why you came to New York and get this magical experience with your family when you could have just, watched a Netflix episode of New York. There's a million different things. Try to force yourself to put on 10 different lenses, come up with 10 different reasons. And at the end of 10 minutes, you can decide, hey, I don't like any of those, but at least for that 10 minutes, you've delved into someone else's world. It will completely change the way you think about spending.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. It also, there's like a reverse pride that always is there. When I drove around a 2002 Honda Civic, I was prideful of the fact that I could easily not drive it, right? I could easily upgrade. I could easily get a sweet new car. So it's like you're driving around, look at all these suckers that are driving cars that are far nicer. It's kind of like your first class example, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
totally.
Oh my gosh, we're all just on the road. They're all safe cars, blah, blah, blah. And then I literally, my therapist literally talked me into getting a Tesla.
Wow.
She's like, you have so much anxiety around this car that you clearly want really bad. Like, what is the deal here? And it was my pride.
Yeah.
I was really wrapped up in this identity of being Mr. Frugal in this very visible way. Like, sure, be frugal when no one knows and see how exciting it is for you. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And never tell anyone how frugal you were. It's like my dad that's like, I love giving, anonymous charitable gifts. I just wish every once in a while someone would recognize me for it. He always says that. And there's something so compelling in our nature that's like, yeah, most of the time I don't need to know, need people to know, but every once in a while I do. So we'll spout off on Facebook or social or with friends or whatever. And it's pride at the end of the day.
That is very, very insightful. Yeah. And the stories that we become married to, the stories that define our identities are so powerful. Like growing up, I'll give you an example. I grew up kids of two immigrant parents, and we learned a lot about frugality. And I still carry those stories forward. It's funny, in the personal finance community, I think there's a bit of a myth that I am like Mr. Overspender on everything. But in reality, my wife and I hardly ever eat out. We live in New York. We eat out maybe once every month and a half together, maybe once every 2 months. My computer is 7 years old, even though I run my entire business on it. So I kept those stories, but I also changed some of the stories I grew up with. And I think that has been one of the most challenging and powerful things. That's a lot of the things that I talk about in the book, which is you can still be frugal on certain areas of life. In fact, you can even just not spend on certain areas you just don't care about. But what I want people to do is really craft the rich life. And there are certain areas in life where I believe you should have no budget at all. Specifically, if you're counting the differences between, should I get pre-chopped lettuce or not? Like, you've taken a wrong turn somewhere back in life. And really, there's no amount of lettuce that can change materially my net worth or even my cash flow. So I just don't even bother spending time on it. What I would rather spend time on is being present, planning where we're going to travel this year, inviting friends and family, creating those memories and experiences. And so that's kind of like what I would challenge people to think about and what differentiates a little bit of my philosophy from some of the others.
Would you say you've evolved through that? Like, are you going to take someone and say, hey, you're going to kind of evolve and learn, and there are these, I'll call them, I don't know, like initial steps you need to take. I know if someone's carrying credit card debt, you have your book walks people through these kind of bare bones steps. But what you're talking about here, is it an evolution where you first care about them and then you don't? Or are you saying, no, like from this point forward, don't care about them? Like chopped lettuce versus the trip. You know what I mean?
I think that, first of all, you need to get your finances just operationally in order. So as you said, if you have credit card debt, I have the exact scripts to use to call and get fees waived and all these like word for word scripts that make people nervous, including negotiating your salary. So there's some basic operational things you need to do to make your life bulletproof. And the way that I define it is I want you to spend less than 90 minutes a month on your finances. I spend less than 60. It all just runs. And so that's number one. Once you get there, what happens is a lot of people stay living in the spreadsheet. So what I mean by that is they fiddle around with some Monte Carlo simulation. They tweak spending on this lettuce versus that, this candle versus that. And I'm like, you guys are concerned with $3 questions. You need to be asking $30,000 questions.
Yeah.
And those questions take you to a whole nother level. Those are questions like, is my asset allocation correct? What am I doing with this money that I've saved to spend this year? What's valuable to me? I need to actually think about not just cutting back, but also earning more and then spending it, using it. Yeah. So I will say that first, I want the foundations in place. And then just by virtue of showing you examples in the book of how other people spend their money, eyes get wide open, because most of the examples that we've heard are like, I was in crippling debt, I paid it off, I feel good. Mm-hmm. And that's where the story ends. But what's the real rich life? To me, that's just the beginning. I want to know what you do with your money. What do you get to do? What brings you joy? What makes you happy? What about your partner, bringing your parents along? That is where it becomes truly a rich life.
I had the thought the other day, and I just thought all this saving for retirement, saving, nest egg this, all of the words around the investing community, the advisors, the words they use, everyone's always talking about saving. And I realized we're all just saving it. We're just deferring spending is all we're doing.
Yeah.
Just for a little while, for good reason, right? So it can grow and things. But it's really still just about spending. And I think sometimes we're so afraid. I don't know where it's come from exactly, because we're not exactly a frugal country to speak generally, right? I mean, we have a negative savings rate. We're just not frugal across the board. And so it's weird that we have this aversion to spending, yet we all spend all the time, I would say recklessly, for the vast majority
100%.
of people. And so it's really funny where it's like, oh, I feel so bad. It's just, there's all of this guilt around all of this bad behavior. And when you come in, and that's where you come in with that consciousness, you're saying, be conscious. I always talk about being aware. It's really just getting people to line up, and then the guilt goes away and the spending still happens and their life is different, I
100% agree with you. It's such an odd puritanical culture we have, where all we do is talk about words like financial literacy. Like, who cares about financial literacy? Everyone fails the test. Like, you know what I'd rather have you do than be financially literate? I'd rather have your money be automatically saved and invested every month. That's better than you passing some test. But if you read my book, you'll pass the test too. And then we also have this puritanical thing about, like you said, the terms saving, retirement, and yet everyone's overspending. Yeah. So instead of calling the ball and saying, hey, we like to spend money. You live in this country. You are being engineered to spend. Instead, we cover our eyes, plug our ears, and pretend, that I'm just not going to spend. I'd rather have you say, you know what? Here's 3 areas of life I'm going to overspend on. And I'm just going to openly admit it. Let me plan it. Let me put it in YNAB. Let me get it going. But then I'm also going to be super honest that these things just aren't important to me. Yeah. And I'm not going to spend any more on it. If you do that, you'd be in a much healthier place than just denial.
Yeah, you heard it here first. You could have like a category group in YNAB called overspending.
Oh,
I like that.
Here we go.
Because even in our literature, overspending means you got to make an adjustment. Mm-hmm. Like something happened, whether it was conscious or not. People flew in that you weren't expecting. They ate all your food, whatever. So you got to roll with the punches. It's our third rule. But the idea of overspending, and I guess you don't mean overspending like out of control. You just mean this is like over the top spending.
Correct.
We could even say that.
That's good. There you go.
I like that.
I'll give you an example too, by the way. I live those same principles. So I believe in saving for everything. I believe in saving, especially for major purchases that are likely to happen. So before I met my wife, I had saved up for an engagement ring. I had also saved up for a wedding and a honeymoon. And because I was saving, what's that?
Fellow. You're a confident fellow.
Well, I was like, if I get that part in line, at least I could just focus on meeting the right girl. So what was amazing though was because, anyone who writes or creates products about money is kind of weird. And frankly, anyone listening to this is a little weird if you're listening weird. I mean, let's all admit it. So it kind of stands to reason that I would have started saving for this stuff in like my mid-20s. Because of that time horizon, I didn't have to save that much every month, right? It's a long time horizon. I had no idea when I was going to meet the right person. What it allowed me to do, though, was number one, to get honest. It's like, hey, I haven't met someone yet, nor am I really trying to in my mid-20s, but I know it's probably likely to happen that I will meet someone someday and we'll probably get married. We'll probably go on a honeymoon. So I can put aside a little bit. And hey, if that doesn't happen, fine. I still have the money. I can do whatever I want with it. I think that when we get really honest about life's trajectory, most of us are mostly the same. We are going to, have the same things happen to us in general. We might choose to live in different areas or in different family settings, but in general, we're going to probably buy a house. We're going to probably be in some sort of relationship, probably take a trip every so often. And so if we can just acknowledge that and get accurate on 90% of life in which most of us are similar, that allows us to shine in that 10% where we might be different. My example that I'm different in is like, I don't eat out that much at all, but when I travel, I like to travel for a long time and I love nice hotels. I just love it. And so because I've made those trade-offs and planned ahead, I can do that, no guilt. And so again, going back to what are your values? If you don't like nice hotels, that's totally fine. It doesn't matter. But there are certain things that you probably love. And if you can just get honest and plan ahead using YNAB, you're like gold. You're way ahead of the curve.
Yeah. And we have to kind of shed the superiority complex we get when it goes back to the judgment, like, I can't believe Ramit stays there when he really knows a hostel. You don't get rained on in a hostel either, you know?
I don't stay in hostels.
And so we have to really be self-aware when we're kind of saying, I can't believe it's just like, well, believe it, do the 10. I love that you're saying not just 3 reasons why Ramit stays in a nice place, but 10.
Yeah.
That's
really hard.
Really good. Because it's not, anyone can throw out 3, like, he has enough money to not have to worry about it. That's like a throwaway number.
Yeah, that's an easy one. Yep.
Yeah. And so you got to keep on moving up. And I love that. I mean, I need to do that with myself because I'm guilty of judging and, I don't know, not understanding why people do what they do. And usually I just swallow it, but I think it'd be even better and more instructive if I could, learn from it. So I love that. Let me switch gears just a little bit, then I'll let you go because I know we got to wrap up. But sure. On the for people we have a lot of people that are running businesses that listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
And I know your business has grown tremendously over the last 10 years or so at least. How do you balance the business reinvesting, business growth with your own personal? It sounds like from the book, it sounds like you're still pulling money out and investing it, not in I will teach, not in your machine. Is that an accurate assumption?
Hell yes. Okay. I'm so glad you asked this because I have to say that I know a lot of CEOs who have really, really successful businesses and they don't invest in the stock market. And I consider that a huge mistake. I think that a diversified portfolio can and should include your business. But I also think that we need to be honest again, right? I will teach you to be rich is about being brutally honest with yourself. Take a hard look in the mirror. How many businesses are around 50 years later? Not that many. And so like I reinvest heavily in the business. I hire more people. We do new tools, all kinds of development of new products. We've got like over 20 courses at iwillteachyoutoberich.com. But I also know that I want to make sure that I'm continuing to invest in my diversified portfolio. So that portfolio is just like a classic. I talk about it in the book in chapter 7, but essentially you can imagine like a target date fund. That's like a good, simple way for most people to invest. What I do is it's a little different because I want to eke out a little bit more tax advantages. So I have different tax advantaged funds in different accounts, but in general, it's a target date fund.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think that any business owner should set a general target to say, based on my profit, I'm going to take this percentage reinvested in the business. And you should have some clear ideas of what that means, right? Is it hiring someone? Is it getting new tools? Whatever. You should also have an amount that you're taking out and investing it in your own portfolio. I think that's critical for business owners. What do you think?
I agree. I just started doing it a year and a half ago, and it's given me tremendous peace to not be constantly like, I get more chips come back at me because the business is growing. That's a huge win. And then you just shove all the chips back on the table and, you go back to your spouse and you're like, I did it again. And, Julie's like, okay, cool. And then 3 years later, the chips come back and you're like, oh, it's a bigger pile. And then you just shove again. I did that for a long time. And so a year and a half ago after we had our last run, I just realized, I had a buddy, he gave me a really good insight. He just said, if you never are taking money off the table, you will eventually have to sell your business in order to extract its value. And I never thought about it. It's really obvious once you hear it. But I just thought, well, I don't want to have to sell the business, right? So it'd be great if, you have a buyer come along and they're like, oh, this will change your life. And you're like, ooh, I probably won't actually. I've been doing this thing on the side for 20 years, and I love that lever in the negotiation, the future negotiation
Absolutely.
that happens. So I've been doing it, and it has given me a lot of peace. And it's funny because as your business is growing, and I'm sure you've run into this, you can't out diversify a fast growing, successful business, right? So there's not enough, or at least for me, there's not enough cash to be like, oh, good, YNAB's worth X. I have no idea. And so compared to all of my little piddly 401k, blah, 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 YNAB just eclipses it regularly. And I can't pull enough out and invest to have it be anything but a very substantial portion of the overall net worth. But it's
that's a good problem to have. And over time, that can be balanced out. But I mean, listen, having a very successful business is one of the most rare and amazing things in life. And I know that you've done it over the course of many years, and you've made a lot of tough decisions. You and I have talked about that. Yeah. And it's no accident, right? To have a successful business, that is never an accident. In fact, I would argue that success of any substantial scale in any field is never an accident.
Right.
It takes showing up every day, pivoting, learning, listening, being brutally honest with what the market is telling you. And so the fact you've done it is amazing. And now that's a great problem. Oh, my portfolio is a little unbalanced because one side is too humongous. Yeah. I'll take that problem.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
Great.
But that's cool that you're teaching people that they got to just always be pulling some off. I've found that to just be it's helped me it's helped me take more risks in the business since we've started doing that.
Yes.
Because
that you've got a net, a safety net.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, for business owners out there that are listening, this is key. You don't want to be making strategic decisions when everything hangs in the balance. It doesn't make for a good environment where good decisions can be made. So
yeah, a good rule of thumb for life is don't let yourself ever get backed in the corner, right? Yeah. Always have an out. And if you don't have an out today, that's okay. But start planning, where are some things that could go wrong?
Yeah.
Maybe I could go into debt on the personal side. Okay, so what do I need to do to prevent that? Oh, my business could take a big hit. I've had that happen. My business has taken a huge hit before, and that was really difficult. One thing that really helped was having large cash reserves and being able to withstand that. So things will go wrong at a certain point. It's just a matter of time. And just having some foresight to plan ahead really gives you peace of mind at night.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that about the work that goes in, because I was listening to a speaker one time. He had closed big negotiation deals. He was kind of a coach along those lines. And just kind of out of the blue, he said, what do you say to people when they'll want to pick your brain and say, hey, Ramit, how did you get where you got? How did you do it? And he said, there's one thing you should never tell this inquiring person, and that's that you got lucky. Because you want to be modest, right? So you'll want to play up the luck. And he said it's the most demoralizing thing you could say to a young person that's aspiring, right?
Wow.
Just be like, well, I just guess you just got to be lucky. It's like, oh, thanks, man. So when I wake up, what do I do?
Yeah.
Anyway, I've taken that to heart in this idea of trying to be maybe falsely modest at times, being honest with that person and say, well, here's a little bit of my story. Here's the efforts I made, and something will pay off. But saying and I got lucky, he said that demotivates. And that seemed to ring true.
That's great advice.
So,
wow. Really good advice. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you bet. Okay. Well, I think that's a wrap. So everyone that's listening, you can grab Ramit's book. You can go to the website, iwillteachyoutoberich.com. I know you said you had loads of courses. It ranges. I mean, you've done so many. I'm not even staying up to speed on all of them. Even your originals that were, earn $1,000 every month, earn 1K, right? One of your originals.
Yep.
That one's still there. Still just gold.
It's a bestseller still. Yeah. We've done ones on starting a business. We've done finding a dream job and negotiating your salary, psychology, like mastering your own psychology, and then even some real fun ones like hiring and managing an assistant, which can usually save you 20 hours a week minimum.
Yeah.
So we've done a lot of fun ones. They're there on our site.
Awesome. And then the book is fantastic. It's bare bones to a degree. And then as you get quickly into it, like by page, 20, you're starting to get insights that I've always loved. So I've always loved your take, Ramit, because it's no BS. And you write very clearly, and it's funny, especially when you read the cryptocurrency part. I enjoyed that a lot. So
Thank you very much.
Really enjoyed it. Anyway, all right. Well,
I'm looking forward to the hate mail.
We will. Yeah, there will be a lot, but they'll either be on their cruise because they sold out in time, or they'll be back at their mom's house. It just will depend on where they landed, So
thank you for saying that.
All right. Well, I will let you go, but thanks for being on the podcast. And best of luck with the book launch.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. We'll see you. All right, that is a wrap with my interview with Ramit Sethi. Again, if you want to check out his book, IWillTeachYouToBeRich.com. It comes out today. 80-some new pages, a really funny section on cryptocurrency that I mentioned in the interview. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed the interview. Until next time, follow YNAB's 4 rules and you will win financially. You've never budgeted like this.